Every man is chasing something: success, money, validation. But what if the finish line is a lie?
We're always comparing ourselves. We have so much to compare to because we can see the whole world on our cell phones, and we'll never be enough compared to that guy or that gal. It's not a good game to play. You never win.
Patrick Sperry was a star athlete, a pop musician, a man who had it all, until his body broke, his mind spiraled, and his spirit demanded something real.
If it's a singing practice, if it's art therapy, if it's dancing, if it's laughter, if it's qigong, walking meditation, there's a million ways that we can connect, but you've got to do that.
From yoga to ritual combat, from self-doubt to self-mastery, his story is a roadmap for every man trying to find peace in a world obsessed with more.
Video gaming, technology, social media for young kids is like an epidemic. Porn usage in young people is something that I'm really worried about.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and we're here with Patrick Sperry. He is the founder of Flourish, which is an incredible wellness adventure retreat company. They do retreats for men, for women, really helping to kind of blend what like the coolest vacation you've ever had with personal self-work and development. He's also done a ton of men's work himself, helped guys, tap into their emotion, tap into their spirituality, just become more alive in general. He's an Iyengar yoga teacher and a certified executive coach. So Patrick, welcome to the show.
Mark, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you for painting such a bright picture of who I am and what I do. And hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm excited to have you on the show. Like how we were saying a little bit in the pre-show, I went to Buddhist University, and you and your company and everything you stand for kind of reminds me of that community. So it's always nice for me to tap back into people that are more spiritually connected, that are more holistic, that kind of take a transcendental view of men, masculinity, and human growth. So I'm excited to just dig in and learn more about you.
Absolutely, Mark. Naropa University is a place where we have a little crossing over, at least as far as the teachings that have informed my worldview. Trungpa Rinpoche wasn't my teacher, but I appreciate the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, and I've studied Buddhism myself, living in Thailand for some time in Vipassana meditation. And Ram Dass, of course, who was part of the founding faculty of Naropa, has been one of my great teachers. I hang out with him through podcasts and pictures every day.
Yeah, so this is digging into that because I'm curious what you think about this. Trungpa, like the book that kind of opened my mind to all this was Sacred Path of the Warrior. I got it in college. For those listeners out there, I'll put it in the show notes. It's like kind of the seminal text from Naropa, right? But he talks about this idea of a cocoon, right? How a lot of people are in cocoons, whether it's like, physical layers that they publish themselves in reality, or emotional layers, or spiritual layers, or whatever. And I think a lot of guys are in cocoons right now. So Patrick, I'm just curious, like, one, if you agree with that, and two, what do you see from guys out there? Like, what are the types of cocoons that they're in, and how do we get them out?
It's a great question, Mark. Since I frame a lot of my philosophy around the yogic perspective, when we talk about cocoons, I immediately think of sheaths, which in yoga are called koshas, and they're the layers of our body. And it starts with this food sheath, which is the physical form, and then it gets more subtle to the energetic, emotional, mental, and eventually this blissful sheath of our existence, which is really deep inside of us. So I think as we continue as people, and perhaps this is even more challenging for men to pierce those layers to realize who they are, because the world outside of us is very attractive. And the allure and the power of the senses, which have us seeking outside of ourselves for fulfillment. And I think the male agenda over time has been high achievement, in order to be able to provide and protect and these types of things. So evolutionarily, maybe men are more inclined towards reaching to the outer world for fulfillment. And I think we find as we study Buddhism and take on spiritual practices that where we find fulfillment is within. So, and considering those layers, like we've got to get our body together. We've got to find some level of physical well-being and health because that's producing the type of chemistry, testosterone, and other aspects of our inner world that help us feel good about being alive, being in a body. From there, we can take maybe that next step towards dealing with the emotional realm. I think it's important to get the body together.
Yeah, say more about that because that was the question I was gonna ask, right? Is like, do those sheets point to a roadmap of, priority of where to work? And it sounds like they do, right? It sounds like working on that kind of like physical layer is where you start.
It's really a good point, Mark, to refine this because there's different styles of yoga. There's four main paths. One is called Raja Yoga, which works with the body a little bit more. It's this hatha yoga, the asanas, the movement-based yoga that you see more popular in the West. Okay, so if you're more body-oriented, inclined, athletic background, you might be able to take on that practice seamlessly. It will feel very much so like in your wheelhouse. And then there's intellectuals, right, who are really keen and they have a sharp sense of mind. And perhaps those people would be better suited for jnana yoga, which is this process that happens with the mind in meditation called self inquiry. If you're action oriented, karma yoga, if you're more emotional and devotional, then you might be inclined towards bhakti, this type of devotional yoga practice where you sing and you dance. All of them kind of happen together. But what's your entry point? Like, what's the path of least resistance? There's so many practices, even outside of yoga. You might find out that ecstatic dance or music is that which kind of unlocks those layers and allows you to access the inner world. Yeah.
Yeah, so what was it for you? Kind of dovetail back to your personal story. Like, how did you start to dig into this work and to shed those sheets, develop yourself?
Mark, I was definitely the perennial athlete growing up. I ended up on a almost full scholarship to the University of Michigan to play varsity soccer. So I was like US national team as a kid, traveling the world playing at a really high level of sport. So when I found physical yoga, which was this hatha yoga practice, it was very natural for me. I was good at it, I got it. So it invited me to keep coming back and developing it. I was really muscle bound and stiff, and it was just super painful and tight everywhere. And I still get tight and stiff, and I have to learn to accept myself, even though I'm the teacher teaching teachers and I can't touch my toes someday. I'm still worthy of love, and I accept that. And it's a process and a practice. So for me, I was inclined towards that physical yoga. I tried it for 2 weeks. And at that point, I signed up for teacher training. So I was pretty much all in from the start. I was smoking a lot of pot. I moved to Hollywood to be a songwriter and a pop star. This is kind of another facet of my life and past. And after my first yoga practice, I lay down to do shavasana, this resting pose, and I just dropped in to this part of myself which I felt like I'd always been looking for through psychedelics or experience or peak moments. And I was just like, wow, that's it. It's right here. And that kept me coming back for more. And I never stopped. And I was quite disciplined to keep going.
How would you describe that part that you found? I'm really fascinated by that because, again, a lot of the guys that come to me feel empty, or they feel numb, or they feel like, they're putting in all this sensation, whether it's like food, drugs, women, whatever, right? But it doesn't hit anything. But it sounds like you've hit something, you found something. Can you, yeah, say more about that?
I think you're just asking great questions, Mark. So thank you for your good listening. And this is something when we talk about the men's work, which is such an important skill to hone. And I see that you've done a good job with that, is this active type of listening, um, which makes the person who you're conversing with feel heard and seen. So I just want to acknowledge you for that.
Thanks. Yeah, it is my job. So
Yeah,
I'm pretty good at it at this point.
you are. It's awesome. So when I took Shavasana for the first time after doing a yoga DVD, I felt this, it was an experience of expansiveness, of this horizontal, uh, energetic reach far beyond my body. And there was a quietness and a subtlety, and I was able to connect with my inner world, and to feel the nuances and the movements within me. There was a quietness, which is really what yoga aspires to. Patanjali says yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, which is the cessation of fluctuations of mind stuff. And there's constituents of the mind. So it's not just one part, but the whole mind is rendered quiet. Then you're in contact with kind of an unfiltered, unconditional reality, which can't really be said. So as I say these words, someone listening might be like, well, what is that? And you have to, those who speak do not know, those who know do not speak. So it's hard to put into words the experience of this silence, but I touched that. And it was so compelling that, I probably got addicted to yoga. And then that's fine. It was a better addiction than whatever else it was that I was playing with to feel something. And soon after that, Mark, since I was in a creative practice of writing music every day, I just started channeling songs. Like some songs you've got to fight for, they take 3 years. And then there's those really rare occasions where you just bring one through. It's a 3-minute and 30-second song that you write in 5 minutes. And that was happening as soon as I started taking on yoga. So I was like, all right, well, this is really good for my creative channel. It's allowing energy to move and it's really productive. So that was a motivation for me as well to continue in practice.
Yeah, it sounds like it helped you feel just more alive, kind of like rising that life force and getting to a place where everything is more open and vital. You know, let me ask you this, because this is my experience doing yoga, right? I did intensive practice in grad school. Now it's a lot more casual. There's also, I think, the experience of a lot of guys that get into any kind of body based work is when they start, often it's pain, right? It's pain. A lot of guys feel nausea. A lot of guys feel their tension. A lot of guys feel emotions that have been stored in the body for a long time. They might cry, they might get angry. They might feel like just terror, fear, you know? Um, I'm wondering, how do you work with that or how do you inspire people to move through those? Or I'm curious if you could talk more about kind of the emotional exploration part of the yoga practice.
It's interesting because a lot of men end up in my classroom. And when I started yoga, I, was falling in love with all of my female yoga teachers. And I wasn't able to concentrate. I mean, I was like 21. I remember it was like Christmas time and I bought a bag of oranges and I wrote poetry with like paint on the oranges and brought them to my teacher. I wasn't focusing on the yoga, I was focusing on, the beauty of the female form. So at my first teacher training, I met a male teacher named Pagan George, and he was from the Iyengar yoga lineage. And I just started practicing in a different way when I started practicing with a man because I saw male body, narrow hips, broad shoulders. There was like an empathy from him to me because he understood the problems that men have in yoga. Typically, forward bends are more challenging and things like that. And I was able to penetrate my concentration just more deeply into the moment to understand the practice. That was what I needed. I'm not suggesting that men shouldn't study with women, but it really helped me to kind of pay attention in a different way. And as men come to my classes, um, I've got a deep understanding of the yoga postures. I lead the teacher trainings and the asana portions of the teacher trainings at the studio that I work at. And my body can get really tight and stiff from a day-to-day basis. I'm building a flight of stairs in my backyard in a traditional Temescal with this amazing Mexican builder. And my body is so stiff. I threw my back out and I've got to teach tonight. I get to teach tonight. So showing up, and I guess the answer to your question, forgive me for being long-winded, is that this layer of authenticity, of kind of owning your stuff as a public figure in front of the crowd really gives people permission to be human. And spirituality often, and especially at the beginning, pushes away our humanity. And we have to look at every part of ourselves on the spiritual path if we're seeking something like enlightenment. And there's different qualifications for one who is cultivating longevity, which is health and well being, compared to one who is earnest and intent on liberation. Two different roadmaps.
Yeah, what are those differences?
The requirements for enlightenment are very steep. So, I was blessed to live in China for about 5 months at a Taoist monastery and study Kung Fu and Tai Chi and Qigong and the internal alchemical arts. And Shifu would explain the difference. He said some of the men in our cohort were like, you know, I masturbate, Shifu, but I don't ejaculate. I'm pulling the energy up my spine. Some of the men were like, I'm drinking my semen to retain the life force. And he was just laughing. He said, as soon as your mind moves from the moment into the field of fantasy, even the thought of lust, the pores of the skin open and the chi is dissipating, there's a loss. So you think you're doing all of these Taoist practices of transmuting energy, but it's the quality of the mind. Maybe that is valid if your mind is completely empty and meditative while, in those practices. So can we refine the quality of our mind stuff to be so still and empty that we can, sublimate spiritual sexual energy without losing it? It's a very subtle art, and the whole like tantric practice and path is slippery because we think we can use sex for enlightenment, which we can, but if we're in fantasy amidst having sex, then we've lost the point already. It wants to be this complete reframe of the goal of sex, which would not be orgasm or ejaculation, but of meditation. And it's not as exciting when you make love with a completely quiet mind frame.
Right. It's kind of about what we talked about before of like, reducing stimulus, right? Like not being overstimulated by fantasy, not being overstimulated by your life, by desire, by craving, by lust, but actually being present and open to what is happening in front of you. Whether it's a sexual experience or you're eating something or you're watching a sunrise, there's all these layers that people have between their mind, or between their soul, I guess, and the present moment.
Yeah, there's so many layers that obstruct our contact with unconditioned reality. And compassion is a huge part of what's required in order to continue the journey of realizing that next layer of who you are. And I'm so hard on myself. I think this is probably the curse of the modern man because we're always comparing ourselves. We have so much to compare to because we can see the whole world on our cell phones, and we'll never be enough compared to that guy or that gal. Um, so it's challenging to really practice acceptance in a radical way, which allows each moment to be enough.
Especially with, like, the advent of, like, YouTube and Instagram and all that, right? Where it's like, you could see an expert in every single field all the time, right? You can see, like, the super jacked fitness guy, you can see the relationship coach, you can see, like, the, best dad in the world, you can see the business executive, and, like, they're just, like, flipping through. And you're like, "Oh shit, if I'm not succeeding in every single aspect of my life, up to these levels," and I think it really brings a lot of guys down. And, the sad part is I think these guys are trying to be inspirational, these influencers, right? I mean, some are trying to make money, but I think most of them are actually trying to be inspirational. But what I see time and time again, especially with young men, is it pushes them away. Kind of a little what you're saying, right? It makes them feel crestfallen and disheartened.
I think you spoke well there, Mark. And we've probably both been there before. I certainly have. Mr. Iyengar, the guru of the lineage which I teach yoga under, um, he said something very pertinent, which was, do not compare yourself to others. And this is about yoga practice and life, and do not compete with yourself. So you can unpack that if you had a practice or even in your day to day and just be in reflection on, okay, so what happens when I compete with myself? I have to be better than I was yesterday. But today I might have limitations. I might be sick. I might have an injury. So if I expect to do in the asana room what I did yesterday, today with the bad back, it's not going to happen. So I might not show up to do anything, or I might hurt myself trying to overdo when my body's giving me feedback, which says, this is enough for now, accept who you are today. That's the dance. And the whole comparison thing, it just doesn't add up to much. And it's a waste of our time and energy. And it does create this sense of being crestfallen, depressed. I was raised by a really devoted father, but he really impressed into my impressionable psyche that I was the best and that also nobody else was really allowed to be. It was me and then everybody else, and I was the best no matter what, even not based on empirical evidence. So I have this perfectionist side, which is really challenging for me at times because I have so much to be grateful for, and I'm often just looking at what's on the next horizon. I don't stop to appreciate what I have, the level of health. Okay, I'm strong, I'm fit, but I still need to lose some weight on the love handle. So until I do, which I might never now that I'm 37 going on 38, then there's this just I don't wanna look at it. I can't celebrate where I'm at today, and, it's not a good game to play. You never win.
Yeah, can you dig into that a little bit more? We've had tons of guests come on the show and talk about shame, right? And male shame and like the idea of not feeling good enough. But we haven't had enough talking about grandiosity because I think that it's two sides of the same coin, right? And I think they're equally as hurtful and painful for men to go through. So I love that you're bringing up this idea of like, at least as a child, right, feeling grandiose. But with that again comes perfectionism, comes really high standards, comes disconnection, right? Because in some ways people are less than you, you know. So I'm curious, yeah, your experience of grandiosity and how you work through that. Because again, it's not nearly talked about enough. And I think a lot of men are in a grandiose place that leaves them very disconnected from the world and their community. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show.
It's true, Mark, and I am still a work in progress. Like, I still have such high vision and ambition in what's possible, and it was that mind frame caused me to have, like, a terrible experience when I came back from India. I was gone for 4 years, and I came home, and I moved to Chicago for the first time. I grew up in Chicago. I went from university to Los Angeles. I was in Hollywood. I went traveling the world for 4 years, so I was out of Chicago for a long time. I never lived in the city. I came back home from India and set up shop in Chicago in the winter, just a few months before COVID, because I wanted to show up for my family dynamic there. I've got a great family, brother, sister, mom, dad. It always felt like there was somebody missing at the dinner table. I wasn't there for most of the important moments in my nephew's life. So I said, all right, I'm going to do this for them. Inside, I had a sense and an intuition that this wasn't for me, that I was supposed to be on the West Coast, which turned out to be true. But I had such high expectations of myself, and I was somehow able to touch that grandiose part of me in India through this puer, this flying boy energy, um, through meditation, through spiritual experiences, pilgrimages, intense practice. I was just really vibrating super high, and I came back to Chicago. And then I started comparing myself to all of my high school friends who inherited their father's companies, who had 4 kids, a wife, a $6 million house in the suburbs. It was impossible for me to catch up to where they were. They had graduated college and been working for 15 years, and I had been pursuing my passions creatively in music, traveling the world, cultivating yoga. But then I wanted that, and I had so much anxiety about not being enough in comparison to my peers, and I was just racing to achieve, and I just burned out. And I didn't sleep for like 20 days. I had this episode of, we can say, insomnia. It was so hard for me to come to terms with where I was at in my life, to ground, to find that gradual path of growth, which would allow me to kind of get to where I wanted to be. But um, I was so far from where I wanted to be professionally at that point that it just created some chaos inside of myself. And that for me was this grandiose version. I couldn't catch it. I couldn't reach it. It was too far, and it caused me to crash.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what stands out to me about that story is the idea of pacing. And a lot of the guys I work with really struggle with pacing. You talk about how like the slow, consistent, grindy often boring pace, right? Like if you're doing your forward fold, you're trying to get lower. It's like it's imperceptible, right? And until like whatever, 2, 3, 4 years later, you're like, oh wow, I can touch my toes. And I think there's like the pace the physical body moves at, which for me, and it sounds like for you, is way, way, way fucking slower than I want it to. There's the pace that it takes to grow a career, the pace that it takes to achieve intimacy in a relationship, right? The pace that it takes to build a business. How do you how do you get okay with the pace? Because I see it in me. I'm very impatient. I see it in a lot of the guys I work with. We just want to like get there, right? We have that instant gratification thing and we want to get there. And it can be really frustrating to like stay the course. So how do you keep yourself or the people that you work with motivated? How do you keep them focused?
What's coming through for me is an aspect of being able to grieve the parts of you, like the dream parts of you that you never accomplished. Because we're at a phase of life right now, Mark, in our mid 30s, going to 40. And there's certain visions we had for who we'd be when we were children that just won't become, and if we're holding on to these versions of ourselves that never manifested and maybe the ship has sailed, it's really hard for us to move on. So I feel like unloading some of that expectation from life that's been shown to us, what as you said, the ideal life is supposed to look like, what they market to us, what we see on social media, and just releasing some of the expectation that we have from life and relaxing into life. I think meditation allows us to slow down, to be more present, um, and hopefully through practices like gratitude and appreciation and leaning into those as practices, we can land where we're at and work from there. Because I think without accepting where we're at, it's really hard to take a step forward. And we're starting to, walk into the realm of the king, warrior, magician, lover, which is really the foundation of the men's work that we do at Flourish. And it's a big part of my philosophical view of masculine identity, these archetypes that are pervasive in the male psyche. We have them. It's not a matter of if they're with us, it's just a matter of how and when they express themselves. So the king energy is the energy that has a vision for the realm. And in this case, it's a vision for the realm of your life. And if we don't have that, we have to figure that one out. And we have to take time even to cultivate, whether it's going on retreat, sitting in a circle of men. Um, as far as feeling like, we're not enough, we'll never get to where we want to go, just sit in a circle of men, or sit in a circle of women, sit in a circle of peers, and hear everybody's story. We're all going through the same thing. And that deflates a lot of the pressure of not appreciating where you're at, perhaps. Because you're not an island unto yourself. You're not the only one that goes through these emotional highs and lows, these defeats, these depressions, these fears and doubts about being enough. Every one of us has it. It's freeing to know that and to hear it from others.
Yeah. Talked about a lot of really good stuff there. I love the male archetypes. For listeners, we recently interviewed Douglas Gillette, one of the authors of King Warrior Magician Lover on the show. Check that out. I'll also post, the book in the show notes. But I'm curious, yeah, I guess two things, right? When you're talking about the power of group and community, love talking about that. And the second thing you're talking about is these archetypes and how you use them. So let's let's start there, right? Like, how do you help guys get in touch with these different archetypes? Because I think similar to you, I find that most guys tend to be dominant in one, maybe two of them. And then the other ones are either in their shadow form, which for listeners, that's kind of like where they're unconsciously controlling you, they're acting out, it's become with like addictions or whatever, right? Maladaptive behaviors, or they're just suppressed, right? They're just like really buried deep. So how do you do work with that, Patrick, during your retreats and the work that you do?
Thanks for asking, Mark. We try to activate these energies when we go to retreat, and that's really what the 4 days are about. So sometimes each day will be an activation of the king, day one, day two of the warrior, and we'll have all different types of workshops and experiences to come in contact with what it feels like to have your positive warrior online, right? So there's fun things we can do. First, we want to understand the concepts basically. So the men have some homework. We'll have a pre-retreat interview with one of our ritual elders who's really qualified to teach the archetypes. He knows them very, very well. So then there's some understanding of what we're talking about by the time we get to retreat. And then it's about waking those energies up. So something like a ritual combat. In the morning, we'll have some kung fu blocking. We'll do some qigong to start to hone that center so that when we go into ritual combat, we're in our center. We're not striking out recklessly at the men that, seek to land a touch. So we'll make a big circle. We'll have a swordsman in the middle, and we'll have teams, 3 men approaching the man in the middle to try to land a touch. While the man in the middle has his sword, you get hit by the sword, you're out, and the teams keep rushing, and you want to clear the field without getting touched. So the man in the middle is honing his sense of precision, his sense of focus, his sense of discipline, not to strike above the neck. And the men who are approaching in their teams, because the warrior doesn't fight alone. So they're learning communication, how to work together, this type of strategical aspect of what the warrior is, a sense of perseverance and determination. So in that way, you leave the activity feeling the power of the warrior when expressed in its generative way. For the lover, we'll do things like poetry and art making and singing and theater. And men grow through challenge is one of the assumptions. So we want to find that edge. And for some people, being in the middle of the circle with the sword is not an edge. They love it. They live for it. Put that man in front of the group and have him read the letter he wrote to his father in apology and forgiveness, in blaming beautifully. You'll find another edge. So we're always seeking to create different edges for the men to walk towards in a safe, loving, compassionate container where they feel like they're allowed to, that they're held. And if there's things that they don't want to touch, then we also accept and appreciate and respect that.
Yeah, so that sounds awesome. The ritual combat thing sounds really cool. I haven't seen that at a retreat before, so that's like a pretty unique offering. How do you There's so many questions, right? So I guess, like, how do you determine where those guys' edges are? Is that from the pre-interview? Are they talking to you during the retreat? How do you find where a guy needs to focus his energy and attention to find that challenge?
We have a team of 4 men who lead and hold space for these retreats. So we have conversations every evening and in the morning to touch base with what we've observed from the participants, and we start to get to know them. There's also conversational and relational aspects of these retreats where we circle up. So we don't rush into ritual combat. Maybe that comes on the second or third day. But the first day is icebreakers, getting to know one another, playful, a little bit lighter until the drum beats at midnight, and then we enter into the realm where there's no turning back. But yeah, it's conversational enough to get to know these guys. There is an intake aspect of it, but we're also good at being intuitive, calling men out, pushing them even in circle, to hone their skills of listening and communication better if they're not quite getting the exercise. So being held accountable, being challenged, creating a safe space where you understand that when you're being challenged or given feedback from a place of love, which is intent on your highest outcome, your greatest good, then any feedback is good feedback
Yeah, exactly.
when
Yeah,
it's coming from the right place. So we
yeah,
just like to create a culture where the men are comfortable with that, and then there's huge, huge room to grow.
yeah. We talk about that on the show a lot. Of like, I think men versus boys, right? I think men crave feedback, and they crave honest feedback, and they crave learning about their blind spots and learning how to grow. And I think, like, in our culture, we don't get enough of that, right? Because of privilege, because of, like, how we can intimidate people, because I think how easy it is to coast in a lot of ways. So I like that you have that feedback, clear mirror piece open.
Feedback builds trust. If you care enough about me, Mark, to give me feedback and I'm able to receive it, I'm gonna really appreciate that because you're showing me again those blind spots, those parts of me which can be bettered, but if you don't care about me, then you're not gonna take the time to do that. So there needs to be some trust in place. It's a practice that builds trust, but I would suggest that we're not very good at giving feedback. Like, nobody says, "Are you open for some feedback?" They'll just tell you what they think about you, and they're really giving advice or suggestions or criticisms. Um, and I find it a lot of men have challenge in their intimate relationships being confronted by their partner. They feel defensive, and then in their, like, emotional reactivity, it's hard for them to be eloquent, to be spacious, to receive the feedback. So just checking in and either coaching your partner or having a conversation with the people in your life who you're in relationship with and suggesting a boundary like, "Well, you know, if you want to address something or give me some feedback, just ask. Because I might be available, I might not be. I might need to request that we check in a couple hours, maybe after I finish this one thing, and I have a time to just relax and then come back to the conversation with clear mind." So that consensual part is super important, and we can all do better at checking in, with that.
100%, right, and it's, like, it's just more effective, like you said, like, if you're consensual, you can actually receive it and maybe make a meaningful change, you know? Um, and yeah, I like what you said about the trust because I think feedback that comes from a place of trust and respect between men is gold. You know, it's the most valuable thing you ever get in your entire life, you know, especially if you could trust that it's clean, it's not coming from a place of wanting to put you down or someone being insecure or whatever, right? It's just like, "Hey, man, here's, like, something I noticed. What do you wanna do about it?" Um
Mark, but you have this interesting experience of being in a relationship with men professionally, intimately. You are a therapist for men. Am I right?
That's true. That's correct.
So you have to remember, and I think what's true, maybe you have a different opinion, is that men are not so much in a conscious dialogue with other men. I mean, I have men's groups, several a month, men's retreats, and from that, I've built a family of men who are helping me, erect the Temescal in the backyard, and we're doing projects together. So now we're inclined to be together more. But when a man's an island unto himself and maybe only has his woman or his family, who knows how alienated, the men that are listening to this podcast are. I've been there before. And every man needs a men's group. Every man needs a male community where there's an elevated conversation. We're not just talking about, you know, women, whatever's, going on at work, sports. We're talking about who we are, how we feel, where we're lacking, what support we need, our challenges in that. And that's, we're hungry for that, deeply hungry. When we launched our men's retreat, it was sold out within like a day or two. The men in our community were like, "I need that." And I would say, "All right, but we're gonna drag you out of bed in the middle of the night, blindfold you, take you out into the woods, put a heavy backpack on you, and send you up to the top of the mountain where we're gonna have opening circle." And they said, "I need that." So we're hungry for challenge. We're hungry for an elevated conversation, for community, and to remember the power of tribe.
Oh, yeah, I agree completely, right? I think a lot of guys are really lonely, and like I was saying a little before, it's like, I think in our culture, it's easy to coast. It's easy to not have challenge in your life, and I think the modern man, just like you're saying, needs to seek challenge because that is how we grow. So when you tell a guy like, "Yeah, it's gonna be kind of intense, it's gonna be tough, it's gonna be physically, emotionally, spiritually, challenging," those guys that say, "I need that," I'm inspired to hear that, you know, because I think reaching guys and giving them these experiences is critical because most cultures up until basically ours did that built in. You know, there were these rites of passage, right? There were these moments of becoming. There were these, welcoming ceremonies into community. And we just like don't have that. I mean, we're way too spread out, we're way too alone, or we're way too just like disparate, to really connect in those ways. So it's great that you're providing those spaces for people.
We're doing the best we can. It's a pseudo initiation rites of passage. It's done at a time and phase of life where it's not as effective. Typically these are done during the puberty years, 12, 13. And then there's like a psychological impact and break into the realm of mature masculine psychology. I'm sure you know the origins of the men's movement, Mark. Are you kind of aware of the the journey from the industrial revolution to where we are today?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a big part of it. In 1870, 1780, 1830, men went to the factory. Boys were raised by women for the most part, especially in the West. And from that point on, boys have not had strong male mentors. And that was kind of the deconstruction of the cohesive family unit. The father would come home not with teachings, but with his temperament. And the assumption is that women cannot initiate boys into mature masculine psychology. That being proximate to mature men, to grandfathers, to uncles, to elders, like we were when we were exchanging trade, harvesting the crops, on the hunt, just that osmosis of being near male bodies has an influence on a boy. So I feel like that piece is really powerful in our men's work. Like the sole act of being in a room with male bodies and kind of the contact and osmosis and the exchange which is happening just by observing is really productive. I mean, that's half the battle. And it feels medicinal when the men arrive and we're together and it's just a different energy. It's nurturing a deep well.
Mhm. I agree. Yeah, Debo has been like empty for a lot of guys for maybe their whole life.
And for generations. For generations. And that's not to blame our fathers, this isn't about blame. It's just the way that history is unfolded. My father was raised by his mother. His father was raised by his mother. It goes on, you know, 4 or 5 generations.
Yeah, it's not personal, right? I mean, you look at, yeah, Industrial Revolution, you look at like World War II, right? You have like many generations of deep, deep masculine and father wounds. And now we're trying to think like pick up the pieces and reinvent it. So, I want to ask you like, what would a modern rite of passage look like? I know you described your retreats, but if you were to like create something for young men, maybe, what do young men need right now to feel, or I guess, back it up. What do young boys need to feel like men? Because that's kind of what we're talking about here is that boy to man transition. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online.
It's very interesting, Mark. We at Flourish had like kids camp a couple years ago. And after kids camp, all of the mothers wanted to have some type of boys program because their boys were out of control. There's a lot of inability to focus energy, um, video gaming, technology, social media for young kids is like an epidemic. And I feel like there's such a disconnection from earth relating, being grounded as I see in young men today. A porn usage in young people is something that I'm really worried about. And I think there needs to be more of a conversation about porn addiction, not just for boys, but for men. And that's probably a different conversation, but it's something that's impacting our youth. So again, getting boys with men who aren't necessarily their fathers, including their fathers if they want to be there, I think is super important. But there's a lot of men who aren't interested really, or fathers who are really busy with their work and they travel all the time and the kids are left at home with the nannies or their mothers. And there's just it's not built into their family dynamics that they have this time to really deeply exchange. So again, the osmosis, the proximity to men, the detox from cell phone usage and video gaming, and just to get boys in touch with nature, in touch with collaboration, working together, energy, is super important, especially in the city. I'm in San Diego, and there's parts of this city where kids are very urban, even though we're by the beach and there's nature all around us. So taking time to get kids out into nature with good guides and still elevating the conversation, but just having enough skill to understand and to ask questions about what these boys need, to hold space for them to be vulnerable and to give them a chance to come out and to share maybe a deeper level. We don't expect boys to be as brave as men might be to divulge, their challenges and obstacles, but I think you'd be surprised at their ability to relate, to open, to be held. I haven't done a lot of work with boys, but I think it's, the frontier which we have to cross with Flourish, and I know there's some good boys to men organizations happening all over the country. What does that look like for us? I think, Mark, I'll just end this thought, um, with the fact that we're kind of initiating ourselves right now. As me and my team of leaders work with men over the years, we're starting to slowly embody more of the mature aspects of masculinity more steadily. And we backslide, and, the high chair tyrant who is, the child king comes out for sure, and we make a mess of things. And then at least we have the framework to say, well, what would the good king have done in that situation? Well, he would have created a boundary for his realm and sent out his warrior to, dispatch the mission to clean it up. It's great to be able to refer to that model so we can start to reflect on where we're not living up to our masculine potential. Um, so first thing is take care of yourself, put on your oxygen mask, get some ground under your feet as what it is to be embodied as a mature masculine energy. And then I think your presence alone is influential on a boy. If the boy wants to act out and you're present with him, he's gonna come and meet you at this level of presence. I don't think he'll be able to act out in front of a group of kings, embodied warriors. We're not it's just gonna be a different conversation. And you have to do it through games as well. Kids like to play, they have a shorter attention span, so the programming would change, but I think there's still a lot of potential for depth and growth there.
I agree. I agree. I often talk about this idea of like proving yourself to yourself. And I feel like that's what these boys need, right? Is like to do something that they are truly proud of for themselves. And kind of what you were talking about earlier is like that could be physical, it could be mental, emotional, or spiritual. But I feel like a lot of the guys, the young men I talk to, they feel like they're losers, frankly. They feel like they've never done anything. They feel like they can't do anything. They feel like very shut down. And I find that this generation, even more so than mine, the millennial generation, like they're really isolated in a lot of ways. And a lot of them have like bowed out of life before it's even begun, and it makes me really sad to see that, because kinda what you talked about with social media, they're looking out and they're like, "Oh, I'm never gonna be any of these people, so, like, why even try?" And I'm hoping that, yeah, through programs like yours or retreat programs, like, you can get men boys that are accepted by men, that you get that kind of like, "You are a man now, you are one of us." I think these boys need to hear that more than anything, just like that they belong, you know?
Yes, Mark, they do need to cultivating a sense of belonging is really our main agenda at Flourish. So it's crucial to the human experience. It's written in our DNA to be in community, to be supported. I also think that if boys or girls go to some transformational program like a Flourish Kids Camp and come home and are exposed to parents who are completely unconscious and abusive and don't know how to communicate, that it doesn't add up to much. So I think the parents also have to take responsibility to do the work on themselves so that the way they relate, the energy that they exchange, even through silence with their children, is vibrating on that same frequency that we're seeking to give the kids on retreat. For example, like if they come home, it can all be undone if mom and dad or mom or whoever's the parental figure isn't operating in a productive and positive way, isn't demonstrating, showing vulnerability, accountability, what it looks like to practice apologizing, to forgive, to ask questions. So parenting is another part of the puzzle here for talking about youth. And I think it's almost too easy to get your kids into camp and hope that that's going to fix all of the trouble at home. Like, mom and dad, you're the ones who have to do the work. You're creating a culture.
Yeah, totally, right, and I think it just reiterates that lack of presence of like, "Hey, let me just throw money at the problem," right? Like, it would just, like, ship my kid off, do this thing. I mean, I see it in my industry all the time with rehab, or youth juvenile programs where it's like, oh, you have the problem kid, you ship them off. They're a different kid in these programs because they're finally getting listened to, they finally have some sense of personal agency, they finally, like, do something that they're proud of, and then they're dropped right back into the toxic family system and, they regress all the way back, and then the rehab gets blamed of like, "Oh, you didn't do anything to fix my kid." It's like, well, it takes kind of like a holistic view.
I think that's a big part of it, Mark. So this is a call for anybody who's raising kids and having trouble with their children to take some accountability, to see what they're, inheriting to their children from their own stash of undigested trauma. And again, like, it's a it's a path of self-responsibility. And if we come back to yoga and spiritual practice, like, nobody can save you. The guru isn't gonna tap you on the head and you're gonna get enlightened. You have to confront the far corners and the dark spaces in your own heart with the light of compassion and be patient and continue to gradually build up, the ability to stay present off the cushion, off the mat. So cultivating some practice for me, based on my experience, because I've come down a long way from being like the most competitive asshole, fighting my own teammates, getting kicked out of practice, just having such a hard time, having such high expectations for everybody else around me, needing to be the best. And I still struggle with this stuff to some degree, but steady practice over 17, 16 years, missing a week here and there, a day here and there, but really stringing consistency, small amounts, like dropping grains of rice each day to build up a mountain in a foundation, 20 minutes, 10 minutes of sitting and following the breath. It's great to get the 3.5, 4 hour asana practices. Your body feels so open. But if you can just go for 10 minutes from child's pose to dog pose to forward bend and get on with your day, you're going to feel more connected. You're going to be more open physically and energetically. So I just like to share that a little bit goes a long way. If it's a singing practice, if it's art therapy, if it's dancing, if it's laughter, if it's qigong, walking meditation, there's a million ways that we can connect, but you've got to do that. Um, do your best. And when you miss the mark, don't be hard on yourself because it doesn't help. It just digs you into a deeper hole. So just be light and nimble and get back into your practices whenever you feel like, I wish, I should be practicing. Well, then just do something. Doesn't take long to connect. I meditated for 10 minutes today and it shifted my state in a real way to be able to come here and have a meaningful conversation with you.
Yeah, I like that. That's really inspiring, right? It's like, yeah, there's a Trungpa quote basically that says like, there's 10,000 doors to the Dharma, but you have to go through one of them, right? You have to commit to something ultimately, right? And I think that's what I'm hearing you say is like, it's just about that commitment and consistency and you'll learn, all the things and lessons along the way, right? There's no perfect one, but you've had to do one. As a wrapping up our program here, I ask this question to most of our guests is like, what would you define as modern masculinity? Because I think it's clear that like the bully and the brute and like that version is not necessary anymore, right? I mean, the culture has changed, the world has changed, you know. So what is the modern man from your perspective?
It's a good question, Mark. I think the modern man has been trying for a while, perhaps since the 60s, to be a bridge between the doer and the beer, kind of get this spiritual side of ourselves. I think maybe in the 50s and the 40s, the masculine archetype of America or the West was really cut off from his spirituality. And then you saw men of the 60s who were young men, and this is part of what I've done in my life. Like, if the spiritual energy of a society is not being upheld by the elders, then it has to be held by somebody. It's really important. So young men started holding the spiritual energy of the community of the United States of America in the 60s because the older men weren't doing that as much. It wasn't living through the human experience as much as it needed to be. So that happened in the 60s and 70s, and then maybe it kind of oscillated back. Consumerism took off. Wall Street had its day. In the 70s and 80s, there was a different moment. But it seems like now the masculine's role is to hold the spiritual energy um, of the community with the women and to be part of that mantle and to also be purposeful and pursuing the Dharma, which is, the deeper meaning for why we're here. And I think holding that spiritual energy allows us to do our work more effectively. I hope and pray that men lean into solution oriented thinking around ways that we can do better for our planet, for the people on this planet, that maybe the peak of greed is slowly going down and there's more conversations and thought about earth care and sustainability as we cast that vision as mature kings for the vision of the future of this planet, which is in peril if we act irresponsibly and only for gain. So to bring back a sense of community, of tribe, that level of leadership, which includes everybody. I think a thought that might land to wrap things up is something that Shifu in China shared with us often. He kept asking us or challenging us to consider how big is your sphere of compassion, or how big is your sphere of inclusivity? Who does your love bubble include? For some, it's just ourselves, maybe not even. For some, it's our family, uh, nuclear family. For others, maybe it's, those proximate in community. But then there's this whole sphere of earth and the universe, and the Buddha arms reach through multiple universes. So how far do yours reach? And does it include the entire earth and all of her children? That's a lot to authentically be able to say that. I'm not sure I can say that I want to be able to say that. I say it as an intention, but really my heart, the intention for me is for men, is that we expand our hearts and learn to stay open, to have clear vision, to pursue our purpose and passions, not at the exclusion or detriment of others, not at the exclusion of our families, of our partners. Can you be a conscious parent, a conscious lover, a conscious businessman, connected to God, so you're humbled in the grandness of that vision? The grandiosity of God might eclipse our own.
Yeah, really well said. And I think it's really some thought-provoking things for our listeners to ponder, right? Like, yeah, how big is your bubble? How many people can you honestly say are in there, and what are the barriers to expanding it further? I think that's an incredible line of inquiry. So, Patrick, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can people find more about you and find more about Flourish?
Well, thank you for having me, Mark. It's been a joy. Flourish, you can find us at peaceloveflourish.com, and you can find us at beflourish on Instagram. There's also patsperrylove.com and patsperrylove on Instagram, which is my coaching and yoga practice. Flourish will be going on pilgrimage this year, either to Thailand or Japan. We'll be going back to Mexico for a beachside retreat of deep practice. And we'll have men's retreat in Mammoth Lakes in June, women's retreat probably before then. So come check out all the incredible opportunities to grow and expand in heart-centered community. And it would be an honor to meet any one of you. in those deep spaces.
Great. Thanks again for being on the show. I will have all that stuff in the show notes. Feel free to check it out. And send this episode to somebody that needs to open up their heart space a little bit, right? Maybe needs kind of like a shake up to attend a retreat, or, expand their consciousness, or find a way to bring more of themselves alive and online. I think Flourish and Patrick Sperry are great people to learn that from. Really great mentorship opportunity here, guys. So yeah, check them out. Check out the books we're recommending. Do some research, right? If you're inspired, and then do all the socials, right? Like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff. You know it by now. Check us out. We're at Men's Therapy Online everywhere. Menstherapy.online is the website. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.